April 5th, 1725, Versailles, just before dawn. A 7-year-old girl climbs into a carriage. She has been told her parents want to see her. That's it. That's the explanation. The most powerful court in the world, a court that had dressed her in silk, given her the Queen's own apartments, paraded her before foreign ambassadors, and printed her face on commemorative medals, couldn't manage a better goodbye than that. The king, her fiancé, had already left. He didn't come to say farewell. He was 15 years old, and he simply walked out of the palace before she could be driven away from it. Her name was Mariana Victoria of Spain. She was the Infanta. She had arrived at this palace at 3 years old, speaking no French, holding her favourite doll and smiling at crowds of strangers who cheered her passage through Paris. The court called her l'Enfant Reine, the Queen Infanta. They had spent 3 years teaching her the rigid grammar of Versailles, how to eat in public before hundreds of eyes, how to receive ambassadors, how to carry herself as the future Queen of France. And then they sent her back. The question sounds simple. What did Versailles really think of this child? But the answer splits into pieces the moment you pull at it, because the court didn't think one thing. It thought several things simultaneously, and almost none of those things had anything to do with her. That's the story. Not a story of a child who was loved or a child who was rejected, but of a child who was used, first as a symbol, then as a pawn, and finally as a problem to be quietly returned to sender. And decades later, when she had become the most powerful woman on the Iberian Peninsula, she made sure that France never forgot what it had done. To understand what Versailles thought of this particular child, you need to understand why she was there in the first place, which means going back to a war. Between 1718 and 1720, Spain fought the War of the Quadruple Alliance against Great Britain, France, Austria, the Dutch Republic, and Savoy, all of them, simultaneously. It ended the way you'd expect, with a humiliating peace agreement, Spain stripped of its Italian ambitions, Felipe V forced to accept terms he despised, and a court in Madrid seething with resentment. The regent of France, Philippe d'Orléans, himself no stranger to political survival, needed a way to tie the Spanish Bourbons to the French Bourbons, before Felipe did something catastrophically destabilizing, possibly another war. His solution was elegant in concept and brutal in execution, a double royal marriage. Louis XV, the 11-year-old King of France, would be betrothed to Mariana Victoria, the 2-year-old daughter of Felipe V, and Louis I, Felipe's teenage heir, would marry Louise Elisabeth d'Orléans, the regent's 12-year-old daughter. Children, all of them. But this was not unusual. This was simply how it was done. The logic was dynastic. Tie 2 royal houses together through their children, and their interests aligned by blood. Create enough shared stake in the future, and the temptation to go to war diminishes. This reasoning had been used for centuries. It required treating children as instruments of state, and every court in Europe accepted that framing completely. The betrothal was formally agreed in March of 1721. The Duc de Saint-Simon, who would later become one of the greatest memoirists of the age, writing his famous memoirs between 1739 and 1749, was sent as the extraordinary ambassador to Spain on November 25th to officially request the Infanta's hand. He was present at the Spanish court. He watched the negotiations. He watched a 2-year-old's future be signed away in formal language by men in powdered wigs. He remembered everything. On January 21st, 1722, Mariana Victoria left Spain. She was 3 years old. Her mother handed her to French attendants. She crossed the Bidassoa River at the Île des Faisans, the island of pheasants, a strange neutral strip of land between the two kingdoms that had been used for exactly these kinds of diplomatic exchanges. Chantal Thomas, the French historian and novelist who reconstructed the scene from contemporary documents, describes the little girl looking for actual pheasants while the adults conducted the ceremony around her. She wanted to see the birds. The adults were negotiating the future of 2 dynasties. She arrived in Paris on March 2nd, 1722, to enormous celebrations. Crowds lined the streets. Commemorative medals were struck with her profile. She was greeted at the Palais du Louvre and installed with proper ceremony. When the court moved back to Versailles that summer, she was given the Queen's apartments. She was 3 years old, almost 4, in the rooms built for the most powerful queen in Europe now, Louis XV. Louis XV had burst into tears when he was told about the betrothal. This gets reported as evidence of cruelty, but it's actually more psychologically honest than almost any other reaction at that court. He was 11. He had already lost his mother, his father, both grandparents, and his older brother within a span of 2 years. He was the last surviving heir of a dynasty. The adults around around him had absolute control over every decision of his life, including this one. And now they were telling him his future wife had been selected and she was a baby. He cried. Of course he cried. By the time he was 13 and Mariana Victoria was 5, he had stopped crying and started avoiding her. Contemporary accounts describe him sulking whenever she appeared at court functions. He left rooms where she was present. He felt, by all accounts, humiliated, not cruel, but embarrassed. There's a real difference. An 11-year-old made to parade beside his 3-year-old betrothed isn't exhibiting coldness. He's experiencing the particular adolescent horror of being made to look ridiculous in public, of having his personal life managed and displayed before the entire European diplomatic community. What's crucial here is that Louis didn't dislike Mariana Victoria as a person. There are reports she was quite fond of him. She was an affectionate, socially adept child who had learned to charm everyone around her. The problem was structural. He was a traumatized, vulnerable boy who was already the subject of enormous political pressure, and this engagement was a constant reminder that other people were still running his life. He had been King of France since he was 5 years old. He had never known anything except being managed. By 15, he wanted that to change. He wanted a real wife, a real marriage, something that felt like agency. A 7-year-old cousin was the opposite of that. He would not improve. When the decision was made in March 1725 to send her back, Louis XV did not protest. There is no record of him objecting. No letter arguing for the engagement's continuation. He had spent 3 years making clear that he wanted it to end, and now it had. The cruelty, and it was a cruelty, even if unintentional, was in the manner. He left before she departed. He didn't say goodbye to a child who had lived at his court for 3 years, who had been his betrothed, who had done nothing wrong except be born 7 years too late. The person who actually saw Mariana Victoria clearly, who wrote about her with both warmth and a kind of piercing historical sadness, was Elisabeth Charlotte of the Palatinate. Known at court as Liselotte, she was the second wife of Louis XIV's brother, Philippe d'Orléans, and by 1722, she was the last surviving member of the old Versailles generation. She had been writing letters to her relatives in Germany for decades, and her correspondence, eventually numbering close to 90,000 letters, is one of the great first-hand records of what the French court was actually like. She saw the Infanta in June of 1722, shortly after the court returned to Versailles, and in a letter dated July 4th to her friend Christian Friedrich von Harling, she wrote something that has survived because it captures two things at once. She described Mariana Victoria as the sweetest and prettiest little thing, with considerable wit for her age. She genuinely liked her, but in the same letter, she wrote, "I cannot get used to seeing nothing but children everywhere, and nowhere the great king whom I loved so dearly." Liselotte died that December, in 1722. She was the last person alive who had known Versailles under Louis XIV as an adult woman of court, and she left behind this observation. The child was lovely, and the child was also the living proof that the world she had known was gone. This is what Mariana Victoria meant to a certain generation at Versailles. Not a future queen, not a diplomatic triumph, a symbol of decline. The court that had once been commanded by the Sun King himself was now being managed around a teenage boy and a 4-year-old girl. For those who remembered it otherwise, this was grief wearing silk. The courtiers who remained, the ones who hadn't known the old Versailles or who had adapted to the new order, responded to the Infanta differently. They were charmed. She was charming. Accounts describe her learning quickly, adapting to French customs with remarkable speed for her age, eating in public before crowds of spectators with visible composure. The court named her l'enfant reine and meant it with some affection. She was popular. She was bright. She was everything a future queen was supposed to be, except the right age. And that, in the end, was the problem. By early 1725, Louis XV was 15. He had recently recovered from a serious illness that had terrified the court and the public, a reminder that the entire future of the dynasty rested on a single adolescent boy with no wife and no heir. The man now managing the government was Louis-Henri de Bourbon, the Duke de Bourbon. His mistress was the Marquise de Prie, a sharp-minded woman who understood power and used it without apology. Together, they looked at the situation and ran the calculation. The Infanta was not yet 8 years old. Even under the most optimistic interpretation of 18th century marriage customs, consummation was years away. Heirs were a decade away, minimum, and if Louis died before then, which he nearly just had, the line died with him. That was the diplomatic argument. The political argument was simpler and uglier. The Duc de Bourbon wanted control over the king, and a 7-year-old Spanish princess came with a powerful family attached. She had been educated at Versailles, yes, but she had Felipe V and Elisabeth Farnese behind her, and as she grew older, she would grow into a political force in her own right. The Marquise de Prie had a clearer preference. Find a queen who was already of marriageable age, who had no powerful family, who would arrive in France grateful and dependent on French goodwill, and who could be managed. There was also a complication no one discusses much. In August 1724, Louis I of Spain, the Prince of Asturias, Felipe V's eldest son and heir, had died of smallpox. He was just 17. This upended the Spanish succession and brought Felipe V back to the throne for a second reign. The strategic value of the French-Spanish alliance had shifted. Spain was now destabilized, its succession less clear, its diplomatic weight harder to calculate. The Duc de Bourbon saw a window. The cost of keeping a 7-year-old Spanish princess waiting for another decade had just gone up, and the benefit of that alliance had just gone down. He moved. The story of how they selected Marie Leszczyńska involves a list that has been reported, though not definitively sourced, to have started with 99 candidates before being narrowed to 17 and then to 4. What is documented is that the Marquise de Prie was looking explicitly for a princess who was simple, docile, pious, without pretensions and without powerful support. She found her in Wissembourg, Alsace, where Stanislav Leszczyński, a dethroned king of Poland, was living in genteel poverty with his 22-year-old daughter Marie. When Stanislav received the letter, he reportedly ran to his daughter's room in tears and told her, "Kneel, kneel and give thanks to God Almighty." Marie asked if they were going back to Poland as king. "Far better than that," her father said. "You are going to France as queen." On March 11th, 1725, the decision was made. The engagement between Louis XV and Mariana Victoria of Spain was terminated. She would be returned to her parents. She was 6 years old, weeks away from turning 7. No one told her the truth. They told her, and this detail has been confirmed by multiple contemporary accounts, that her parents wanted to see her, that she was going for a visit. The child who had spent 3 years learning to be French, who had been handed to French women as an infant and taught French customs and French formality, was loaded into a carriage under false pretenses. Louis XV left the palace before she was driven away. He did not say goodbye. The exchange at the French-Spanish border mirrored, in reverse, the ceremony at the Ile des Faisans 3 years earlier. Mariana Victoria travelled towards Spain. Moving in the other direction, in a separate carriage, was Louise Elisabeth d'Orléans, the French princess who had been married to the Spanish heir Louis I. Louis had died of smallpox the previous August, and his widow, who had never been officially welcomed into Spanish court life and had been something of a scandal there, was being returned to France at the same time. 2 women travelling in opposite directions across the same frontier, one 7 years old and freshly discarded, one 20 and recently widowed. The diplomats called it a return of royal persons to their respective courts. Spain did not use those words. Felipe V and Elisabeth Farnese received the news of their daughter's dismissal as exactly what it was, a national humiliation. They had agreed to this engagement at significant cost. It was the mechanism of their peace after a catastrophic war, and they had surrendered their daughter at age 3 as a gesture of trust and dynastic investment. The French had taken the child, educated her in French customs for 3 years, given her the Queen's apartments, put her face on commemorative medals, and then handed her back on 3 weeks' notice because a new political calculation had been made by the men currently managing Louis XV. Elisabeth Farnese, who by this point was effectively governing Spain. Felipe V's mental health had deteriorated significantly, and she had become the dominant decision-maker at the Madrid court. Took the insult personally, dynastically, and diplomatically. Henry Cayman, the historian of Philip V of Spain, makes the point that Spain was already raw. Felipe had just lost his eldest son, Louis I, to smallpox the previous year. The return of Mariana Victoria was a second blow within 12 months. 2 children lost, one to death, one to the cold arithmetic of French power politics. Spain's response was immediate and strategic. Within months, Felipe V signed the Treaty of Vienna with Austria. Austria, the country that had been Spain's great adversary throughout the Habsburg period, the power France had spent years trying to isolate diplomatically, the natural enemy of Spanish Bourbon interests. Spain chose alliance with Austria specifically because it humiliated France most effectively. It destroyed the diplomatic architecture that the double marriage had been designed to create, reversed a decade of French foreign policy work, and left Versailles scrambling. Alfred Baudrillard attributed the entire 1725 Treaty of Vienna to Elisabeth Farnese's response to this insult. Her stubborn refusal to follow the guidance of the French ambassador as she redirected Spanish foreign policy out of fury and wounded pride. The Duc de Bourbon lasted exactly one more year. In 1726, Louis XV dismissed him, reportedly in disgust at the political fallout. Cardinal Fleury, who had been the king's tutor and was a far more skilled political operator, took over and governed until his death in 1743. The move that was supposed to consolidate Bourbon power over the king collapsed completely. The woman who had been selected to be docile and without support turned out to be a beloved queen who gave Louis 15 children and outlasted most of her detractors. And Mariana Victoria went home to Spain. She was there for 4 years. In January 1729, at age 10, she married José, the Prince of Brazil and future King of Portugal. The records suggest it was, by the standards of royal marriages of the period, a successful one. She became deeply embedded in Portuguese court life, bore 9 children, and exercised genuine political influence. In 1750, when José was crowned King of Portugal, she became queen. In 1776 and 1777, when her husband's health deteriorated and he could no longer govern, she served as regent, effectively running one of Europe's maritime empires. She was a woman shaped entirely by Versailles, and then handed back before she could become what Versailles had made her for. Portugal got the queen France had trained. She never publicly discussed what had been done to her. She didn't have to. Her actions said it. When the French court came, decades later, with proposals to renew dynastic ties between the two families, Mariana Victoria declined twice. Her daughter, Maria Anna Victoria, was proposed as a bride for the Dauphin of France, the son of Louis XV, the son of the boy who had abandoned her without a farewell. She refused. A second proposal, connecting her family to Philippe Égalité, was also refused. The woman who had been treated as a diplomatic instrument returned the treatment in kind, using the only currency that royal families actually understood, the withdrawal of alliance. There's no letter where she explains her reasoning. There doesn't need to be. The pattern is clear. When Versailles wanted something from her, she said no. So what did Versailles really think of Louis XV's child bride? The honest answer is that Versailles thought several things, none of them fully compatible, and most of them were not actually about her. Elisabeth saw her and felt the weight of a civilization changing. A court that had once orbited a magnificent adult king now built around children, and Elisabeth could not reconcile herself to it. Her tenderness for Mariana Victoria was real. So was her grief for what Mariana Victoria's presence represented. The sweetest and prettiest little thing, she wrote, and you can hear both meanings. The child is lovely, and the child is a symptom. Elisabeth had herself been sent from Germany to France at 19 to marry a man who had no interest in her as a woman, and she had survived that by becoming a writer, by pouring everything she observed and felt into letters she sent home to people who remembered her. She understood, in a way no one else at Versailles quite did, what it meant to be a woman placed inside a diplomatic arrangement. She died in December 1722, 6 months after watching the Infanta settle into Versailles. She was the last person who had loved Louis XIV as a living man, and she left before she had to watch the child be sent back. The courtiers who surrounded Mariana Victoria daily liked her genuinely. She was exceptional, socially adept, charming, quick to learn, composed in formal settings that would have undone most adults. The nickname L'Enfant Reine was not ironic. She carried herself as though she belonged in those rooms, and for 3 years nobody gave her any reason to believe otherwise. The historian Nancy Mitford, writing in 1954, described her as a golden-haired darling who appeared at state functions and trotted around after Louis like a little pet, which is both affectionate and revealing of exactly how the court categorized her. She was beloved. She was also, in the language of the court, a pet, something decorative and endearing that you could send away when it became inconvenient. Louis XV, who never understood the power he had to wound by simply leaving, experienced her primarily as an embarrassment, not a person to be cruel to, but an inconvenient reminder of his own controlled, constrained, not yet adult life. His avoidance was adolescent, not vicious. He was a boy being managed by everyone around him, and this child fiancé was the most visible piece of evidence of that management. He couldn't push back against the ministers, he couldn't refuse the ambassadors, but he could leave a room when she walked in, and so he did. It was also, in its own way, devastating, because he never once considered what it meant to be on the other end of it, to be the child who kept entering rooms that the king then abandoned. The Duc de Bourbon and the Marquise de Prie didn't think about her at all, except as an obstacle. In their calculation, she was a variable to be removed. The decision was made in March, announced formally and executed in weeks. The child, who had been brought to France with commemorative medals and street celebrations, was sent back with a diplomatic letter and a lie about visiting her parents. The Duc de Bourbon lasted exactly 1 more year before Louis XV, likely pushed by Cardinal Fleury, had him dismissed in 1726. The political gamble failed. The woman selected to be docile and without support turned out to be a deeply loved queen who gave Louis 15 children. Marie Leszczyńska outlasted nearly everyone who had used her and would have discarded her just as readily. And Spain, her parents, her country, her mother who had handed her to French attendants at age 3, received back what France had used and discarded. They turned that into foreign policy. 20 years of diplomatic consequences flowed from a decision made in 3 weeks about a 7-year-old girl. What's striking, looking across all of it, is that the one person in this story who had the clearest-eyed view of what had happened was also the one person who had no language to describe it at the time. She was 7. She was told her parents wanted to see her. She got into the carriage, but she remembered. Women who survive systems like that one tend to remember very precisely. The double marriage exchange of 1722 was not unusual for its era. Parents handed over infant daughters to foreign courts as gestures of peace, and foreign courts received them as symbols of alliance. The children involved were understood to be serving their families, their dynasties, their nations. That was the framework. That was what everyone on every side had agreed to. What the framework couldn't account for was the woman on the other end of it, 40 years later, sitting on the Portuguese throne with the power to say no. Mariana Victoria of Spain arrived in France with her favourite doll and a smile for the crowds. She left in a carriage bound for a country she no longer remembered. She built a life, a reign, and a legacy that far outlasted everyone who had discarded her. And when France asked for her family, she had a simple answer: no.